In the winter of 1894, in a small town called Millbrook, Pennsylvania, a traveling photographer named Thomas Wickham arrived to offer his services to local families. Photography was still a luxury then, reserved for special occasions, weddings, funerals, family gatherings meant to immortalize bloodlines before time erased them. Wickham set up his studio in the back room of the town's general store, where light poured through a single window and dust hung in the air like suspended memory. On February 14th, a cold Thursday afternoon, the Hargrove family arrived for their sitting. They were a modest farming family. Father dead 3 years prior from scarlet fever, mother worn thin by labor and grief. The children were all that remained of the family name: Robert, age 16, Margaret, age 14, and Lucy, age 8. They stood in front of Wickham's canvas backdrop, stiff in their Sunday clothes, faces frozen in the solemn expressions common to portraits of that era. Wickham took the photograph. The glass plate was developed that same evening. When he reviewed the image the next morning, something stopped him. He stared at the plate for several minutes, then wrapped it carefully and stored it without showing it to the family. He told Mrs. Hargrove the plate had been damaged and offered to retake the photograph free of charge. She declined. Money was tight. One photograph was enough. Thomas Wickham left Millbrook 2 days later. He never returned. The photograph remained in his collection for 31 years. When Wickham died in 1925, his archive was donated to the Pennsylvania Historical Society. A young archivist named Eleanor Finch cataloged the images in 1931. When she reached the Hargrove photograph, she stopped. She stared at it for a long time. Then she wrote a single note in the ledger: "Requires examination." The photograph shows 3 children standing side by side. Robert Hargrove on the left, tall and gaunt, his hand resting on a wooden chair. Lucy Hargrove on the right, small and pale, her fingers clutching a cloth doll. And in the center, Margaret Hargrove. But something is wrong. Margaret's face is out of focus, not blurred by motion, but distorted, as though the light bent around her features. Her eyes are darker than they should be, almost hollow. Her expression does not match her siblings. Robert and Lucy stare ahead with the blank solemnity expected of children forced to stand still for long exposures. But Margaret is smiling, not a soft smile, not a polite smile, a wide, knowing smile that does not belong on a 14-year-old girl in 1894. And her shadow falls in the wrong direction. Check if you're already subscribed to this channel, because what you're about to hear will make you question every photograph you've ever trusted. Millbrook, Pennsylvania, in 1894 was a town of 400 souls, built along a narrow valley where the Lehigh River carved its way through limestone and coal. The town survived on farming, logging, and a small iron foundry that employed 30 men. Life was hard, structured by seasons and scripture. Death was common. Families buried children in the churchyard with the same frequency they planted crops. The Hargrove family lived 3 miles outside town on a plot of land that had belonged to Mrs. Hargrove's father. The house was small, wood-framed, heated by a single stove. The father, William Hargrove, had died in 1891 during an outbreak of scarlet fever that killed 11 people in the valley. His widow, Catherine, raised the children alone. Robert worked the fields. Margaret helped with household tasks. Lucy was too young to do much but feed the chickens and carry water. By all accounts, Margaret was an unremarkable child. Church records describe her as obedient and quiet. A teacher's note from 1892 mentions she had adequate handwriting, but little curiosity. There are no records of illness, no complaints of strange behavior, no indication that anything about her was unusual. Until the photograph. Eleanor Finch, the archivist, could not explain what troubled her about the image. She showed it to her supervisor, a man named Dr. Howard Penrose, who had studied photographic chemistry at Yale. Penrose examined the plate under magnification. He concluded that the distortion in Margaret's face was not the result of movement, chemical error, or damage to the glass. The image, he wrote, was properly exposed and developed, yet anomalous in ways I cannot reconcile with known photographic principles. Finch began researching the Hargrove family. She found census records, property deeds, a brief obituary for William Hargrove. She found baptism records for all 3 children. She found Margaret's enrollment at the Millbrook School in 1889, but she found no death record for Margaret, no marriage record, no mention of her after 1894. In 1933, Finch traveled to Millbrook. The town had changed little. She located the general store where Wickham had set up his studio. It was still standing, though it had been converted into a feed supplier's office. She found the churchyard and walked among the graves. She found William Hargrove's headstone, weathered but legible. Beside it was a smaller stone, Lucy Hargrove, 1886-1897, taken by influenza. There was no grave for Margaret. Finch interviewed 12 elderly residents who had lived in Millbrook in the 1890s. Only 2 remembered the Hargrove family. One, a woman named Mrs. Ida Crenshaw, recalled that the Hargroves had moved away sometime after the youngest died. The other, a man named Samuel Voss, said he remembered Margaret because she stopped coming to church and people talked. When Finch asked what people said, Voss hesitated. Then he said, "They said she wasn't right, that she'd changed." Finch pressed him. Voss would not elaborate. But before she left, he said one more thing. There was a fire at the Hargrove house. It burned to the foundation. That was 1896, I think. No one was inside, thank God. But after that, the family left. Finch located the property records. The Hargrove land had been sold in 1897 to a logging company. The house was not rebuilt. The land was eventually absorbed into state forest land. Today, the site is marked only by a stone foundation slowly sinking into moss and soil. Eleanor Finch returned to Philadelphia determined to understand the photograph. She was not a superstitious woman. She had been raised Presbyterian, educated at Bryn Mawr, trained in archival science at the University of Pennsylvania. She believed in evidence, documentation, and rational explanation. But the photograph disturbed her in a way she could not articulate. It was not the distortion in Margaret's face, though that was troubling. It was the smile, the confidence in that smile, the sense that Margaret knew something the viewer did not. Finch began corresponding with experts in early photography. She sent copies of the image to chemists, optical physicists, and historians of photographic technology. Most dismissed it as a flawed exposure or lens aberration. A professor at MIT suggested the glass plate had been subjected to heat or humidity that warped the emulsion. A retired photographer in Boston theorized that Wickham's camera had a defective lens that caused localized distortion. But none of these explanations accounted for the shadow. In photographs from the 1890s, shadows were dictated by the light source, usually a window or an oil lamp. In the Hargrove photograph, Robert's shadow falls to his right, consistent with light entering from the window on the left side of the room. Lucy's shadow falls in the same direction, but Margaret's shadow, faint but visible, falls forward toward the camera, as though she were standing in front of a light source that did not exist. Finch brought this detail to Dr. Penrose, who examined the plate again. He admitted he could not explain it. He suggested the shadow might be an artifact of reflected light, though he could not demonstrate how such reflection would occur. Finch asked if it was possible the photograph had been tampered with, manipulated after development. Penrose said no. The plate showed no signs of retouching, double exposure, or chemical alteration. Whatever you see in this image, he told her, was present when the shutter opened. In 1934, Finch published a brief article in the Journal of American Archival Studies titled Anomalies in Early Portrait Photography, a Case Study. The article was technical, restrained, and made no sensational claims. It simply described the photograph, presented the research, and concluded that the distortions remained unexplained. The article attracted little attention. 3 letters were sent to the journal in response, 2 from academics suggesting alternative explanations, 1 from a woman in Ohio who claimed she had seen a similar phenomenon in a photograph of her grandmother. Finch filed the letters and moved on to other projects, but she kept a copy of the Hargrove photograph on her desk. She looked at it often, and every time she looked at it, Margaret seemed to be looking back. In 1936, Finch received an unexpected letter. It was postmarked from Scranton, Pennsylvania, and signed by a man named Robert Hargrove. The letter read, "Dear Miss Finch, I understand you have been inquiring about my family. I saw the article you wrote. I am the Robert Hargrove from the photograph you described. I am now 58 years old. I do not know what you hope to learn, but I will tell you this. My sister Margaret disappeared in 1895. We were told she ran away. My mother believed otherwise. The photograph you have is the last image of her that exists. If you wish to know more, I will speak with you, but I ask that you do not publish what I tell you. Some things should remain buried." Finch traveled to Scranton the following week. She met Robert Hargrove in a small diner near the train station. He was a thin man with gray hair and tired eyes, dressed in work clothes that smelled of machine oil. He worked as a foreman at a textile mill. He had never married. He lived alone. Finch thanked him for agreeing to meet. Robert said he had thought about refusing, but the photograph haunted him, and he wanted someone to know the truth. He began his story. "After my father died, my mother struggled. We all did. But Margaret struggled differently. She became quiet, distant. She would stand in the yard at night, staring at nothing. My mother thought it was grief, but it was more than that. Margaret started saying things a 14-year-old girl should not know. She told my mother that Mr. Calloway, the man who owned the mill, would die in a fire. 3 weeks later, he did. She told a neighbor that her baby would not live to see summer. The baby died in June. People began to avoid us." Robert paused. He stared at the table. "In February of 1894, my mother took us to have our photograph made. Margaret did not want to go. She said the camera would see her. I did not understand what she meant, but when we stood for the photograph, I saw her smile and I felt afraid. That was the only time I ever felt afraid of my own sister." He continued. "A few months later, Margaret stopped eating. She would sit in her room for hours, speaking to no one. My mother tried to get the doctor to see her, but he said there was nothing physically wrong. In the summer of 1895, Margaret left. She walked out of the house one morning and did not come back. We searched for days. The sheriff came. They found no trace of her. My mother believed she had been taken by someone or something. I do not know what I believe." Finch asked if he thought Margaret had run away. Robert shook his head. "Margaret did not run. She was not fleeing. She was called." Finch asked what he meant. Robert said he did not know how to explain it. He only knew that Margaret had changed, and whatever she became, it was not the girl he had grown up with. Before they parted, Robert gave Finch a small object wrapped in cloth. He said it was the only thing of Margaret's that remained. Inside the cloth was a leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed and brittle. Robert said Margaret had written in it every night for months before she disappeared. He had never read it. He could not bring himself to. He asked Finch to read it and decide what should be done with it. Finch took the journal back to Philadelphia. That night, she opened it. The first entry was dated April 12, 1894. The journal is small, no larger than a man's hand, bound in cracked leather and filled with Margaret Hargrove's careful script. The handwriting is controlled, almost compulsive. Each letter formed with precision, each line perfectly straight. There are no drawings, no flourishes, no wasted space. The entries are dated, but they do not read like a diary. They read like a record, a testimony. Eleanor Finch read the journal in a single sitting. When she finished, she closed it, wrapped it in cloth, and locked it in a drawer. She did not open it again for 2 weeks. The journal begins with a single sentence. I saw it today. Margaret does not explain what it is. The entries that follow are short, fragmented, and increasingly strange. She describes standing in the yard at dusk and seeing something move at the edge of the trees, something that was not an animal, not a person, but shaped like both. She writes that it watched her. She writes that it did not move when she moved, but when she looked away, it was closer. On April 19th, she writes, I tried to tell Mother, but the words would not come. I opened my mouth, and all I could say was that I was tired. But I am not tired. I am awake. more awake than I have ever been. On April 27th. It speaks to me now, not with sound, with knowing. It shows me things. It showed me Mr. Calloway's mill burning. It showed me Mrs. Patterson's baby turning blue in her arms. I did not want to see these things, but now I cannot unsee them. And they happen, exactly as I saw them. On May 6th, I asked it what it wants. It said it does not want, it only is. It said I am changing. It said I will understand soon. The entries grow longer. Margaret begins describing sensations she cannot name, feeling the thoughts of animals, hearing the heartbeat of the house, sensing the weight of the ground beneath her feet as though it were breathing. She writes that food no longer tastes like anything. She writes that her reflection in the mirror looks wrong, though she cannot explain how. On June 14th, Mother took us to have our picture made. I did not want to go. I knew the camera would see me. I tried to refuse, but she insisted. When the man told us to stand still, I felt it watching through me. I felt it smile. I could not stop it. The man looked afraid when he finished. He did not show us the picture. On July 2nd. I think I am dying, not in body, in some other way. I can feel myself slipping, but I am not afraid. It tells me that dying is only a word, that what I am becoming is older than words. On August 19th, Robert will not look at me anymore. Lucy hides when I enter a room. Mother prays every night. I hear her through the walls. She asks God to save me, but I do not think I need saving. I think I need to leave. The final entry is dated September 3rd, 1895. I am going now. I do not know where, but it is calling, and I must answer. I am not afraid. I am not Margaret anymore. I am something that remembers being Margaret. That is enough. The journal ends there. The remaining pages are blank. Finch did not know what to make of the journal. She considered showing it to a psychologist, but she feared it would be dismissed as the writings of a disturbed child. She considered publishing excerpts, but Robert had asked her not to. She considered destroying it, but she could not bring herself to do so. Instead, she did what archivists do. She preserved it. She placed the journal in an acid-free folder, logged it in the archives of the Pennsylvania Historical Society, and classified it under Hargrove Family Papers, 1894-1895. And there it remained for 63 years. In 1999, a graduate student named David Marsh was researching rural mental health in 19th century America. He found the journal while searching the archives for primary sources. He read it in a single afternoon. He immediately recognized its significance, not as evidence of the supernatural, but as a window into the mind of an adolescent girl experiencing what modern psychology would likely diagnose as dissociative identity disorder or early-onset schizophrenia. Marsh included excerpts from the journal in his dissertation. He presented Margaret's case as an example of how mental illness was interpreted through religious and superstitious frameworks in the 1890s. His dissertation was well received. It was published as a book in 2001 under the title Voices in the Wilderness, Mental Illness in Rural America, 1880-1920. But Marsh was not satisfied. He wanted to know what had happened to Margaret. He returned to Millbrook, just as Finch had done 66 years earlier. He walked the site where the Hargrove house had stood. He searched local death records, hospital records, asylum records. He found nothing. Then he found something else. In the archives of the Scranton Public Library, Marsh discovered a small newspaper clipping from October 1895. The headline read, "Strange Child Found Near Lehigh River." The article, barely 3 paragraphs long, described a girl of approximately 14 years old found wandering near the riverbank by a fisherman. She was barefoot, dressed in a torn nightgown, and unresponsive to questions. She was taken to the Scranton police station, where she remained for 3 days without speaking. On the 4th day, she disappeared. The article noted that she had left no trace, and that authorities assumed she had run away during the night. The article did not give the girl's name, but it mentioned one detail. The child's face bore an expression of unnatural calm, and her eyes were described by the attending officer as dark beyond reason. Marsh cross-referenced the date with Margaret's journal. The girl was found 6 weeks after Margaret's final entry. The description matched. Marsh believed it was her. But where did she go after that? He never found out. In 2003, Marsh received an email from a woman named Sarah Wickham, a genealogist researching her family history. She had come across Marsh's book and recognized the name Thomas Wickham, the photographer who had taken the Hargrove photograph. She told Marsh that Thomas Wickham was her great-great-grandfather and that she possessed several of his personal effects, including letters and notes. She offered to share them with Marsh if he was interested. Marsh traveled to Vermont, where Sarah lived. She showed him a wooden box containing Wickham's correspondence. Among the letters was one dated February 16, 1894, addressed to a colleague in Philadelphia. The letter read, "I have encountered something I cannot explain. I took a photograph 2 days ago of 3 children in Millbrook. When I developed the plate, I found that one of the children, a girl of about 14, appears distorted in a manner I have never seen. Her face is obscured, as though the light refused to settle on her. I fear the plate is ruined, yet I cannot bring myself to destroy it. There is something in her expression, something I cannot name. I showed the image to no one. I will not return to Millbrook. I do not believe I am welcome there anymore." Marsh asked Sarah if there was anything else. She said there was one more thing. She retrieved a small envelope from the bottom of the box. Inside was a second photograph, smaller, rougher, printed on cheap paper. It showed a single figure standing in a field. The figure was out of focus, but unmistakably human, female, young. Her face was turned toward the camera, but her features were lost in shadow. At the bottom of the photograph, written in pencil, were 2 words. She followed. Marsh asked Sarah if she knew what the photograph meant. She said her family had always believed that Wickham suffered a breakdown in the years after he left Pennsylvania. He became obsessed with the idea that something was watching him. He burned most of his negatives. He refused to take portraits anymore. He died alone in a rented room in Boston, surrounded by unsold photographic equipment and journals filled with drawings of a girl's face. Marsh never published his findings. He told colleagues he could not corroborate the story. But privately, he admitted that the Hargrove case had disturbed him in ways he could not rationalize. He said he sometimes thought about the photograph, about the smile on Margaret's face, and wondered if she had known even then that someone would be looking at her more than a century later. He wondered if she was still smiling. In 2011, the Hargrove photograph resurfaced on the internet. A user on a forum dedicated to historical mysteries posted a scanned copy of the image with the caption, "Creepy photo from 1894. What's wrong with the girl in the middle?" The post went viral. Within days, the image had been shared across Reddit, Twitter, and various paranormal blogs. Users speculated wildly. Some claimed it was proof of demonic possession. Others suggested it was a primitive Photoshop experiment. A few argued it was simply a damaged photograph that had been misinterpreted. The Pennsylvania Historical Society, overwhelmed by requests for information, issued a brief statement confirming that the photograph was authentic and part of their permanent collection. They declined to comment on the distortions in the image, stating only that early photographic plates were susceptible to various forms of chemical and optical irregularities. But the internet was not satisfied with a technical explanation. The story of Margaret Hargrove spread. Podcasts covered it. YouTube channels analyzed it. Paranormal investigators traveled to Millbrook, Pennsylvania, searching for the remains of the Hargrove house. Some claimed to have experienced strange phenomena at the site: electronic devices malfunctioning, unexplained sounds, shadows moving in peripheral vision. Most left disappointed, finding only forest and silence. In 2014, a filmmaker named Rachel Duvall produced a short documentary about the photograph. She interviewed historians, photographic experts, and descendants of Millbrook residents. She traveled to the site of the Hargrove house and filmed the overgrown foundation. She included excerpts from Margaret's journal, provided by the archives with permission from Robert Hargrove's estate. The documentary was titled The Girl in the Middle and premiered at a small film festival in Pennsylvania. It was well received but never widely distributed. Duval, however, did make one discovery that had eluded previous researchers. While reviewing census records from 1900, she found an entry for a woman named Margaret Harlan, listed as a resident of a private sanatorium in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. The entry noted her age as 19, her birthplace as Pennsylvania, and her condition as melancholic dementia. Duval requested medical records from the sanatorium, which had closed in 1952. The building had been demolished, but some records had been transferred to the state archives. After months of searching, she found a patient file for Margaret Harlan. The file contained an intake form dated November 1895. The patient was described as a young woman, approximately 15 years old, found wandering the streets of Harrisburg. She was nonverbal and unresponsive to stimuli. She was committed to the sanatorium under the care of Dr. Emil Strauss, a physician specializing in disorders of the mind. Dr. Strauss's notes describe Margaret as an enigma. She did not speak, but she seemed aware of her surroundings. She ate when offered food. She slept at regular intervals, but she showed no recognition of her own name, no emotional response to her environment, and no interest in interaction. Strauss wrote that her eyes were disturbingly focused, as though observing something beyond the visible plane. For 3 years, Margaret remained at the sanatorium, unchanged. Then, on March 14, 1898, she disappeared. The file contains a brief incident report stating that Margaret was last seen in her room at 9 p.m. during a routine check. When staff returned at 6 a.m. the following morning, she was gone. The window was locked from the inside. The door was locked from the outside. There were no signs of forced exit. The report concludes, patient Margaret Harlan vanished under circumstances that cannot be explained. Search efforts yielded no results. Case remains open. Duval attempted to trace Margaret's movements after 1898, but found no records, no death certificate, no hospital admissions, no police reports. Margaret Harlan, if that was truly Margaret Hargrove, disappeared from documented history entirely. But Duval found something else. In the basement of the building that had once housed the sanatorium, a storage room still existed, used by the current property owner as a records archive for an insurance company. Duval gained access and discovered several boxes of uncatalogued materials from the sanatorium, old invoices, staff schedules, and patient drawings. Among these items was a small leather notebook, unmarked and water-stained. Inside were pencil sketches, dozens of them, all drawn in the same obsessive detail. They depicted a girl standing in various poses, facing forward, facing away, arms at her sides, arms raised. The drawings were anatomically precise but emotionally void. No expression. No life. Just the meticulous rendering of a human figure repeated over and over. At the bottom of the final page, in the same handwriting, was a single sentence. She watches through every face that sees her. Duval included the notebook in her documentary. She did not speculate on its meaning. She simply presented it as evidence of Margaret's time at the sanatorium and let viewers draw their own conclusions. After the documentary aired, Duval received an email from a woman named Helen Cartwright, a retired librarian in Ohio. Cartwright said she had seen the documentary and wanted to share something. She explained that in 1978, while cataloging old files at a public library in Cleveland, she had found a photograph tucked inside a book of local history. The photograph showed a woman standing on a street corner, dressed in early 20th century clothing. The woman's face was slightly out of focus, but her posture was rigid and her expression was blank. On the back of the photograph, written in pencil, was a date, 1912. Cartwright said the photograph had unsettled her, though she could not explain why. She had filed it with the library's archival materials and forgotten about it until she saw Duval's documentary. When she looked at the Hargrove photograph, she said, she immediately recognized the woman in the 1912 image. The resemblance was undeniable. Cartwright sent Duval a scanned copy. Duval compared it to the 1894 photograph. The facial structure matched, the height matched, the posture matched. If the woman in the 1912 photograph was Margaret Hargrove, she had not aged a day. Duval did not publish the comparison. She said it was too speculative, too unverifiable. but privately, she admitted it troubled her. She said the 1912 photograph had the same quality as the 1894 image, the sense that the subject was looking at the viewer, not just posing for the camera, the sense that she knew she was being seen. Duvall stopped researching the case in 2016. She said she had learned everything she could, and further investigation felt invasive. She said she sometimes wondered if Margaret wanted to be found or if she wanted to be forgotten. She said she no longer looked at the photograph because every time she did, she felt as though Margaret was looking back and smiling. If you've ever felt watched by a photograph, leave a comment below with just the word "watched." Let's see how many of us have felt this. In 2018, a digital archivist named Marcus Chen was hired by the Pennsylvania Historical Society to create high-resolution scans of their photographic collection. The project was part of a broader digitization initiative intended to preserve fragile materials and make them accessible to researchers worldwide. Chen, who had worked on similar projects for institutions like the Smithsonian and the Library of Congress, approached the task with professional detachment. He had scanned thousands of historical photographs, most of them unremarkable portraits of people long dead. When he scanned the Hargrove photograph, he noticed something unusual. Using infrared imaging, a technique that reveals details invisible to the naked eye, Chen discovered faint markings beneath the surface of the plate. The markings appeared to be text, written in a substance that had absorbed into the emulsion but was not visible under normal light. Chen enhanced the image digitally and was able to read the text. It was a single sentence, written in reverse, as though intended to be read in a mirror. "She is still here." Chen reported the finding to his supervisor, who suggested it might be a notation made by Wickham or a later archivist. But Chen pointed out that the text was beneath the emulsion, not on top of it. It had been there when the photograph was taken. It was part of the image itself. Chen's supervisor dismissed the finding as a chemical artifact, a trick of light and degradation. But Chen was not convinced. He began researching the history of the photograph, reading Eleanor Finch's article, David Marsh's dissertation, and Rachel Duvall's documentary. He found the journal. He found the letters. He found the sketches. And then he found something no one else had. Chen used a technique called photogrammetry, a process that analyzes the spatial dimensions of objects in photographs, to examine the Hargrove image. He wanted to determine whether the distortion in Margaret's face was caused by lens aberration or physical distance. What he discovered was impossible. According to the photogrammetric analysis, Margaret was standing in the same plane as her siblings. She was the same distance from the camera, but her face was not. The spatial data suggested that her face was approximately 3 feet closer to the camera than the rest of her body, as though her head had moved forward while her body remained still. Chen ran the analysis 3 times. The results were identical. He published his findings in a technical journal devoted to digital archival methods. The article was titled, "Spatial Anomalies in 19th Century Portrait Photography, a Case Study." It attracted little attention outside academic circles. But one reader contacted Chen directly. The email was unsigned, sent from a disposable address, and contained a single attachment. The attachment was a photograph. The photograph showed a woman standing in front of a train station. The image was modern, color, digital, taken with a smartphone. The woman was facing away from the camera, her back to the viewer. She was wearing a long coat, her hair tied back. The photograph was unremarkable except for one detail. In the reflection of the station's glass doors, the woman's face was visible, and it was Margaret's. The metadata embedded in the image file indicated it had been taken on October 14th, 2017, at Union Station in Washington, D.C. Chen did not respond to the email. He deleted it. He stopped researching the Hargrove case. When asked about it later, he said only that some images are not meant to be analyzed, only archived. But he kept a printed copy of the photograph. He kept it in a folder labeled Unresolved. In 2019, a Reddit user posted a thread titled, "Has anyone else seen this woman?" The post included a grainy photograph taken on a subway platform in New York City. The woman in the photograph was partially obscured by other passengers, but her face was visible. Several commenters immediately noted the resemblance to the girl in the 1894 Hargrove photograph. The original poster said they had taken the photograph on their phone in 2018 and had not thought much of it until they saw an article about the Hargrove case online. The thread was locked by moderators after it devolved into arguments between skeptics and believers. But within weeks, other users began posting similar photographs. A woman in a crowd in London. A woman at a bus stop in Seattle. A woman standing in the background of a wedding photograph in Montreal. Each image was different, but the face was the same, always slightly out of focus, always staring directly at the camera, always smiling. None of the photographs could be verified. Reverse image searches turned up nothing. Metadata was either missing or inconclusive. The images were dismissed as hoaxes, pareidolia, or coincidence. The thread was eventually deleted, but the reports did not stop. In 2020, during the early months of the pandemic, a TikTok user posted a short video filmed in an empty grocery store. The user was walking down an aisle, filming the rows of empty shelves. In the final 2 seconds of the video, a figure appears in the background, a woman standing motionless, facing the camera. The user claimed they did not see the woman while filming and only noticed her when reviewing the footage. The video went viral, accumulating millions of views before it was removed for violating community guidelines. Dozens of users claimed the woman in the video was Margaret Hargrove. Some said they recognized the expression, the same knowing smile. Others dismissed it as a random shopper caught on camera. The original poster deleted their account. But the video had been downloaded and reposted across multiple platforms. And in every version, in every frame, the woman in the background was perfectly still. She did not blink. She did not move. She simply watched. In 2021, a podcast dedicated to unsolved mysteries featured an episode on the Hargrove photograph. The host interviewed historians, photographic experts, and digital forensic analysts. The consensus was that the photograph was genuine, the distortions were unexplained, and Margaret Hargrove's fate remained unknown. The episode concluded with a call to listeners. If anyone had information about Margaret, they were encouraged to reach out. The podcast received over 300 emails. Most were theories, speculation, or personal anecdotes about similar photographs. But one email was different. It was sent from an elderly woman in Pennsylvania who said her grandmother had known the Hargrove family. The woman, who asked to remain anonymous, said her grandmother rarely spoke about the Hargroves but had told her one story before she died. According to the grandmother, Margaret Hargrove did not disappear. She left. She walked out of the house one morning and was seen by several people in town over the following weeks. She was always alone. She never spoke. She never stopped moving. People said she walked without purpose, without destination. She simply walked. And wherever she went, people felt uneasy. Animals avoided her. Children cried when she passed. One day she walked into the woods outside Millbrook and was not seen again. The grandmother said people believed Margaret was still out there, walking, because things like her don't stop. The podcast host asked what the grandmother meant by things like her. The woman said her grandmother had used the word hollow. She said Margaret had become hollow, emptied of whatever had made her human, filled with something else. The podcast host did not include the email in the episode, but they mentioned it in a follow-up blog post, noting that the story was unverifiable and possibly apocryphal. They said the interview had disturbed them, though they could not explain why. They said the woman's voice on the phone had been calm, matter-of-fact, as though she were describing something ordinary, as though being hollow was just another way of being. The blog post was deleted 2 weeks later. The podcast has not covered the Hargrove case again. Today, the Hargrove photograph remains in the archives of the Pennsylvania Historical Society, stored in a climate-controlled vault alongside thousands of other images from the 19th century. It is available for viewing by appointment. Researchers, historians, and curious visitors occasionally request to see it. Most leave disappointed. Without the backstory, it is just another Victorian portrait. 3 children standing stiffly, their faces frozen in time. But some visitors see what Eleanor Finch saw, what Thomas Wickham saw. what every person who has truly looked at the image has seen: the wrongness. The sense that Margaret is not posing, but waiting. That she is not looking at the camera, but through it. That the photograph is not a record of the past, but a window into something ongoing. In 2023, the archives received a donation from an anonymous source, a small wooden box containing a collection of letters, photographs, and personal effects attributed to Thomas Wickham. Among these items was a final letter, dated 1924, 1 year before his death. The letter was addressed to no one. It was never sent. It read, "I have spent 30 years trying to forget the girl in the photograph. I destroyed my equipment. I stopped taking portraits. I moved 3 times thinking distance would help. But she followed. I see her in crowds. I see her in reflections. I see her standing at the edge of my vision, always watching, always smiling. I am an old man now, and I am not afraid of death, but I am afraid of what comes after, because I think she is waiting. And I think she has been waiting since 1894, not for me, for all of us. Because once you have been seen by something like her, you cannot unsee it, and it cannot unsee you." The letter was filed with the rest of Wickham's papers. It has never been displayed publicly. In recent years, the Hargrove photograph has become a fixture in online discussions about unexplained phenomena, historical mysteries, and the nature of perception. It has been analyzed by artificial intelligence, examined by professional skeptics, and debated by believers in the paranormal. No consensus has been reached. No definitive explanation has been offered. But the photograph endures. And so does the question, who was Margaret Hargrove? Was she a girl experiencing a psychological break, her illness misunderstood by a society that had no framework for mental health? Was she a victim of photographic error, her image distorted by chemistry and light? Or was she something else, something that defies categorization, something that slipped through the cracks of reality and left behind only a smile and a shadow? The answer perhaps depends on what you are willing to see. Because the photograph does not change, it has looked the same for over a century, but every person who looks at it sees something different. Some see a damaged plate, some see a troubled child, some see a warning, and some see her looking back. There is a theory, proposed by no one and believed by many, that photographs do not capture reality. They capture attention. That the act of looking at an image creates a connection between the viewer and the subject, a bridge across time that allows something to pass from one side to the other. If this is true, then every person who has looked at the Hargrove photograph has been seen by Margaret, and if she has been seen, perhaps she has been sustained. Perhaps she endures not in spite of the photograph, but because of it. Perhaps that is what she knew in 1894, when she stood before Wickham's camera and smiled. The site where the Hargrove house once stood is now part of state forest land, accessible by a narrow trail that winds through dense trees and undergrowth. The foundation is still visible, though it is covered in moss and slowly sinking into the earth. Visitors are rare. There are no signs, no markers, nothing to indicate that a family once lived there. But people still come, drawn by curiosity, by obsession, by the same inexplicable pull that has kept the story alive for more than a century. They walk the site, they take photographs, they leave flowers, notes, small offerings. Some say they feel watched, some say they feel nothing at all, and some say they see her, standing at the edge of the trees just out of focus, her face turned toward them, smiling. If you've watched this far, it's because you liked this story. Leave a comment saying, "I've watched this far so I can get to know you and see who really enjoys the stories here on the channel." And if this story made you think, made you uneasy, made you look twice at an old photograph, then hit the like button, share this with someone who appreciates the mysteries history leaves behind, and subscribe. Because there are more stories like this, more images that refuse to be explained, more faces that watch from the past waiting for someone to look back. History does not forget. It only waits.